The year was 1930, and Herbert Hoover was president. The Great Depression was in full swing, and you could buy a Ford Model A for $500. Those old cars required a lot of gas. They were big, they were powerful, they were fast, and they went through a lot of oil. So when you went to the service station and filled them up with gas, they always topped them off with oil. So here we see, buried in this frozen ground, one of my favorite bottles ever. Is an oil bottle from the 1930s. Wow, the fact that that's not broken, that's like a miracle. Yeah, here's another one right here. So this is like a $50 bottle if it's in good condition and you find the right buyer. Alright, so we're gonna have to take our time and extricate this bottle. It's buried in the frozen ground. So the fact that it looks like it's in good condition is like a miracle, because there's all kinds of rocks here, and in the late winter time, like just icebergs come ripping down the river and just destroy everything. So we're gonna have to take our time. It might be in good condition, which would be crazy. I think I'm gonna scrape it with a stick so that I don't break it. It gets dark so fast. It's like 4 o'clock and it's already getting too dark to film. So here we go. Is it in good condition? Uh-oh. Perfect. Ooh, that's nice. Wow. Look at that. See all that ice out there? During late winter, huge icebergs will come ripping through here and just destroy everything. It's amazing to see it. And the fact that that tall, skinny bottle isn't broken or damaged, that's unbelievable. How great is this bottle? It was pulled from the Mississippi River, and it's historical and it's in good condition. So let's go clean it up. It's a strange bottle because it's so tall and skinny. The center of gravity is pretty high, so all you had to do was bump it and the whole thing would fall off the shelf and crash on the floor, and a quart of oil would go everywhere. I don't think you would ever get that cleaned up. But the bottle has these veins on it, which are probably to give you some grip when you're out there working on the car and you're all dirty and your hands are greasy. This would allow you to pour it. The reason why it's probably tall and skinny was probably because it'd be hard to grab a bottle by one hand. If it was a quart bottle, it would be a whole lot fatter, and so I guess this is the design that they came up with. This was a reusable, refillable bottle. It had a pop top on it, like the Coke bottle top. And you would buy this from the gas station. They'd give it to you in like a 6-pack, like a wire 6-pack. You would take it home and use it in your tractor or your car, and then you would bring it back to the service station and they would refill it and recap it. And because of that, the government came up with a rule saying that you had to have a fill line on this. That way the customers knew that they were getting exactly 1 quart, and you wouldn't buy it if it was under a quart, especially during the Great Depression, where you had to be mindful of money and waste. So it's an interesting bottle. It's not exactly rare. They're collectible. This one's worth about $50, $75 on a good day, but they don't really survive that much in bottle dumps because this shape right here is so easily crushed. The fact that I found this, it must have been positioned perfectly in order to be in near perfect condition, like this one. Henry Ford was a genius. He was an elite. He was rich and he had elite intelligence. And he was one of the first people to understand human resource management. In 1914, he decided to raise his workers' pay rates to double what they were. And so he paid them $5 a day in 1914. And he did this because he was trying to solve the turnover crisis that plagued the industry at the time. He thought that happy employees would be productive employees. And so he went out of his way to recruit what he thought were productive employees. He didn't want to hire gamblers or drinkers or deadbeat dads. He thought that if he could find some family men to work, that they would be working for a higher purpose, not just generating money so that they could waste it on booze and gambling, but money to raise their families. And that would keep them productive, make them diligent, make them show up on time, not call out sick, not risk being fired. And his plan worked. But it didn't survive the recessions in the 1930s. At that time, you had to lay off workers because the car boom had collapsed at that point. And so there was no choice but to lay off workers in order to be competitive. And in 1932, protesters gathered in response to what they figured was poor treatment by the Ford Motor Company. And the protesters were made up of three basic groups. You had former employees that had been laid off. You had union organizers, and then there was also members of the Communist Party. They got a permit to demonstrate, to protest inside the city, and that's where it went bad. Their permit only allowed them to protest inside the city. And so when they tried to march out of the city towards the Ford headquarters, they were stopped by the police at the city limits because their permit only allowed them to protest within that limit. Well, the protesters were warned that if they continued to march toward the Ford headquarters, then the police were going to fire tear gas into the crowd. And they decided to keep going, and so the police did. They fired tear gas, and it didn't work. The crowd didn't disperse. Instead, they turned violent. They picked up rocks and started throwing them at the police. The next step that the police took was to try to disperse the crowds by spraying them with cold water from fire hydrants and fire trucks. And so they tried to set that up, and it didn't work because the crowd, again, pelted the fire trucks and the police with rocks. Well, the situation grew more and more dire, and eventually the rock throwing got so bad that a gunfight broke out. And I think 8 people died, and an all-out riot erupted. And so they called it the Ford Hunger March, and some people call it the Ford Massacre. And by and large, what the protesters were demanding was kind of unrealistic. They wanted the Ford Motor Company to pay for their mortgages and to pay for their coal use during the wintertime. And I've never heard of a business doing that before. The business usually doesn't pay for your utilities. Some of the demands that they wanted were reasonable. They wanted to unionize. They didn't want anyone spying on them or looking into their personal life, whether or not they were drinking or gambling. But by and large, it was a response to the recession. And so this bottle right here is from 1931. The Ford Hunger March happened in 1932. And so because of that, this is a relic of the past. This is a historical relic. And I'm very happy to find this because it's a relic of that time period, and it's hard to find this unbroken. So the fact that I found it in very good condition is amazing. So thank you for joining me on that adventure. I'll see you next time.